So the question here is apparently, what is the optimal recruitment maneuver in ARDS? And I have 15 minutes. So let's start defining very quickly what is lung recruitment. Lung recruitment is what happens in two of these CT scans. On the top CT scan, going from 5 centimeters of water to 45 centimeters of water, the amount of open lung does not change. And conversely, the amount of white lung, collapsed lung, non-aerated lung, does not change much. So this is a bad recruiter. Recruitment takes place in this patient. Going from 5 centimeters of water to 45 centimeters of water, the amount of aerated lung increases a lot. Now we can get little information, important information. Who's more diseased here? The one that recruits a lot or the one that recruits nothing? The more diseased is the one that recruits, because normal lung is not recruitable, is already recruited. So if a lung has a lot of tissue to be recruited, then the lung is more diseased. And the patient is probably, it's not an absolute rule, but the probability is that the patient with more recruitable lung is sicker than the patient with less recruitable lung, with the same disease at the same stage of ARDS. These as exceptions, mind you, is not a strict rule. It's a matter of probability. And you all know that pneumonia is much less recruitable than early ARDS. So, can we predict recruitability without doing a CT scan? I don't know whether Luciano, which is the author of this paper, really still believes in these numbers, but they sound reasonable. And a recruiting patient, a good recruiter, usually is a patient with a PO2 FiO2 ratio less than 150. And this is already a good chance of being a good recruiter. Particularly if when we increase PEEP, dead space decreases. We never think about dead space, but dead space is a measure of how many perfused alveoli we have at play. When dead space decreases, the number of ventilated and perfused alveoli must have increased, and that is what interests to us. Or, as already mentioned by Peter Suter in 1975, Jean-Daniel Schiss just mentioned this paper, an increasing compliance. An increasing compliance means that more lung is at play with ventilation. Because, as somebody said, in ARDS, the lung is not stiff, is small. And if we increase the size of the lung, if we increase the size of the ventilated lung, one of the possible signs is an increasing compliance. So if we have two of these occurring, then this is probably a good recruiter. But what I've been telling you up to now, that recruitment does exist, that a good recruiter is probably more diseased than a non-recruiter patient, and we can predict recruitability even if we do not do a CT scan. You see here sensitivity and specificity in the very small sample that originated the paper we've been citing here. But, okay, I know that a recruiter patient is more diseased than a non-recruiter patient. But should I recruit a recruitable patient? Why should I recruit a recruitable patient? There are many reasons to recruit a recruitable patient. First of all, ARDS, by definition, has a lot of lung collapse. Actually, it's not in the definition. Where is Jesus? The collapse is not part of the definition, but I can warrant you that lung collapse is one of the characteristics of ARDS. And lung collapse, atelectasis is bad, because the atelectasis means more hypoxia, decreased compliance, interface stress amplification, that means more probabilities of villi, and also increased probabilities of secondary infection and bacterial translocation. We have a lot of experimental animal evidence on that. And worst of everything, a non-recruited lung, a lung that is not recruited at PEEP5, might open up at plateau pressure and then close back again, and then open up again, and then close back again. They tell me this is not good. It increases inflammation. This is called atelectrauma and contributes to biotrauma. So it's possibly, there are good indications that a recruit is better to keep the lung recruited. How to do that? Well, this is one way. We start from ventilation. You see here is an example from 5 of PEEP to 20 of plateau. Then we raise pressure up to 40 for something like 30, 40 seconds, and then go back to a higher PEEP. This is very common recruiting maneuver. Then you might get into something more bold, extreme, that is going up in steps to 45 of PEEP and 60 of plateau. This is the recruitment maneuver suggested by the group of Amato. And they showed, first of all, they decided that to define full recruitment when PO2 plus PCO2 would reach 400 millimeters of mercury at a pressure of 40. And so, you see, 45% of the patients were fully recruited at a plateau of 40, but then still there was another 50% of patients that required much higher pressures to be recruited. And I think that 60 plateau pressure is a very high pressure. And I'm kind of scared. However, these investigators have not been reporting side effects. I must confess that I normally refrain from getting to such, that for time being I call them extremes, but perhaps I'm biased. But I'm rather uncomfortable from, let's say, these pressures up. I'm uncomfortable. I suppose the patient too is uncomfortable, but I mean, I've no proof of that. You should keep in mind that high intrathoracic pressures compromise hemodynamics normally. And the higher the pressure, the higher the compromise. The higher the chest elastance compared to the lung elastance, the higher the increase in intrathoracic pressure, and so the higher the hemodynamic compromise. So different patients will respond differently to a step increase, to the same step increase in airway pressure. So you have to measure. You cannot do a recruitment maneuver blind. You should at least look at your monitors, see what happens. So I've been telling you up to now that recruitment is possible. Some patients are good recruiters, some are not. Then we can do a recruiting maneuver. Recruiting, and what we usually do is something like this. We put the ventilator to CPAP and have a high pressure on CPAP, something between 30 and 45 centimeters of water, depends on the kind of patient, on the level of hypoxia, on how stubborn the physician is, for 20 to 40 seconds. Good. So Lapinski from Toronto did something like that. He did recruitment maneuver in a patient with 87 of arterial oxygen saturation, and saturation went up to 93. Oh, then it dropped down to 87 again. Recruitment maneuver is unuseful. No, it's not unuseful. He redid it. And now instead of 7 of PEEP, he put 10, and the saturation stayed up. Then he thought he learned. So in another patient, he recruited the patient, and he put 10 of PEEP. But in this patient, the oxygenation went down again. So he used 12, and it went down again. He used 15, and the PEEPs and the saturation stayed up. Which is the lesson? You can recruit the lung, but unless you select the proper PEEP, the lung will de-recruit again. Because PEEP and expiratory pressure does not open the lung, and expiratory pressure prevents the recruitment. Because the lung opens up at different pressures. Some alveoli open at 15, some at 20, a lot of 10 at 20, some at 30, some never open up. And I don't know, 60 is not here, but the good part is that to close down, they have to reach a much lower pressure. You see, most alveoli open at 20, but they close at 5. It means that if you open these alveoli, they will stay open as long as you keep a PEEP pressure of at least 5. But these alveoli need a PEEP of at least 12. So opening pressures are different from closing pressure, and we should exploit this to maintain open the lungs. In practice, after a recruitment maneuver, we can do a decremental PEEP trial. We start from high PEEP and then decrease PEEP 2 centimeters every 4 minutes. A fall in PO2 will suggest that something is closing down. Then we redo the recruitment maneuver, and now we apply the PEEP, the lowest PEEP that prevented the recruitment. So the concept here is that we have opening pressures that are rather high, rather than higher than normal plateau pressure, 35, 40. Then we have to use enough PEEP to prevent the recruitment, and use a ventilation that stays between the allocated plateau pressure, 24, 25, 28, and the selected PEEP. Keep in mind that high FiO2s foster absorption atelectasis. The higher the FiO2, the quicker the reabsorption of what you have opened. And time is running out. Keep in mind that the best recruiting maneuver is proning. Proning is a recruiting maneuver that does not use pressure. In proning, we minimize hyperinflation and we minimize the collapsed lung. It has been shown in at least 4 or 5 papers using CT scan. So proning is the best recruiting maneuver because it does not use pressure. You recruit by positioning. What makes a good responder to recruitment? A patient can be a good recruiter, but can respond or not respond. If you start with a patient 25 of PEEP, it's very difficult that you can recruit anything. This last slide will take 30 seconds. Do I have 30 seconds? When we believe that recruiting is very good because it improves hypoxia, it improves, but we should keep on a small portion of our brain, we should keep in mind that many patients do not need recruitment. A patient with lobar pneumonia, none of us will try to recruit the lung. But when pneumonia interests 2, 3, 4 lobes, then we ventilate this patient and play with recruitment. This patient with just lobar pneumonia gets home sooner or later. This patient, sometime. So recruiting is good. Recruiter patients are usually more sicker than non-recruiter. Recruiting is good. Keep PEEP in mind. Don't be extreme with pressure. Thank you.